They say the Wild West has no mercy, but what I found in Copper Creek that night was worse than any outlaw or gunfight. A girl crying in the dark alley, a man who should never have touched her, and a drifter with nothing left to lose. Tonight, you're going to see how far one man will go to protect what's right, and how quickly a town can change in the blink of a gun. Comment below where you're watching from, and if these Wild West stories grab your heart, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, stay with me, because this story won't let you look away. The first thing that struck me about Copper Creek was the silence. Not the kind of silence you find in wide-open plains under a sky big enough to swallow a man whole, but the heavy, suffocating quiet of a place that had long since given up on hope. Even the wind seemed reluctant to linger in those narrow streets, carrying with it only the stench of coal smoke, rot, and the faint, sour tang of spilled whiskey. I had seen plenty of towns like it in my time, places promised salvation by the railroad and left instead with rusted tracks and empty dreams, but something about Copper Creek felt different. It was as if the ground itself carried a curse, and every man, woman, and child who walked its dusty streets bore the weight of it in their eyes. I arrived on a grey afternoon in the summer of 1887, though the season hardly mattered. Nothing about Copper Creek suggested warmth or life. My horse, a scarred bay gelding with more miles behind him than sense ahead, was lathered and trembling beneath me after 3 straight days of travel. My own bones ached as though they'd been carved from stone, and the weight of the silver in my saddlebags felt less like wealth and more like a burden. Every clang of my spurs against the warped boards of the main street echoed like a funeral bell. I had no business here. Truth be told, I never had business anywhere anymore. The war had stripped me bare of purpose, and the sickness that took Catherine had stolen what little remained of my heart. In the years since, I drifted from trail to trail, cattle drives, mining camps, and railroad jobs, never staying longer than a season, never letting a place or person tether me. A ghost among the living, carrying scars no whiskey could dull and no prayer could mend. Copper Creek should have been no different. A place to lay my head, refill my stores, and move on. But the town had other plans for me, though I didn't know it then. The Golden Spur Saloon sat crooked at the corner of Main Street, its windows so caked in grime they turned the lamplight inside into a dull amber glow. I pushed through its batwing doors, and the stale air hit me like a fist. Cheap whiskey, unwashed bodies, and the lingering smoke of cigars rolled from God knows what. Men hunched over their glasses, faces drawn tight by years of hard luck, while a tired piano player hammered out a tune that had long since lost its cheer. I found a corner table, ordered whiskey that tasted closer to turpentine, and tried to lose myself in the dim haze of the room. That's when I heard it, soft at first, almost lost beneath the din. A voice. Not the shrill laughter of one of the painted girls who worked the upstairs rooms, not the growl of drunken men trading insults, but something sharp, desperate, and small. A child's voice. It drifted in from beyond the saloon's back door, breaking through the fog of alcohol and smoke like a knife. Please, no. I didn't mean to drop it. The sound stopped me cold. My glass froze halfway to my lips, and for the first time in years, something stirred in my chest. A pull I hadn't felt since Catherine had been alive. The bartender must have seen me listening, because his eyes caught mine across the room. He shook his head slow, deliberate, and went back to polishing the same filthy glass he'd been working on for what seemed an eternity. His meaning was clear. Don't get involved. But some things a man can't turn away from, not if he wants to keep whatever scrap of soul he has left. I pushed back my chair, ignoring the stares that followed me, and walked to the back door. The hinges groaned as I shoved it open, spilling me into an alley choked with shadows and stinking of garbage. That's when I saw her. A girl, no more than 12 or 13, kneeling in the dirt beside an overturned bucket, her thin arms scrambling to gather a handful of spilled potatoes. Her dress was nothing but rags, her cheeks hollow, and streaks of grime clung to her skin where tears had carved clean paths down her face. But it wasn't her hunger or her raggedness that stopped me cold. It was the man towering over her. He was built like a bull, shoulders bulging beneath a filthy shirt, a cigarette glowing between his fingers like the eye of a demon. His face was flushed with drink, his breath so thick with whiskey I could smell it from yards away. And in his eyes I saw it, pure cruelty, the kind that finds pleasure not in survival, but in the breaking of others. "Clumsy little wretch," he snarled, raising the cigarette, the ember burning brighter as he brought it close. "Maybe this'll teach you not to waste what ain't yours." The girl froze, potatoes tumbling from her hands, and her voice came out a whisper so soft it nearly broke me in half. "Are you gonna put it out on me again? Again?" That single word struck me like a bullet. Something inside me snapped, not the brittle kind of breaking that leaves a man hollow, but the hard, cold transformation of steel forged in fire. I stepped forward, into the weak circle of lamplight spilling from the saloon window, my hand resting on the grip of my Colt. "I don't think that's gonna happen," I said. The man turned, eyes narrowing as he sized me up. Up close, I saw the burst veins across his nose, the yellow teeth stained with tobacco, and most of all, the flicker of fear behind his drunken rage. He had spent his life bullying those smaller, weaker. Now he faced someone his own size. "Stay out of this, stranger," he slurred, though his voice shook. "The girl's mine to discipline. Maybe once, years ago, I might have listened. Maybe I'd have told myself it wasn't my fight. But I wasn't that man anymore. Not since the war. Not since Catherine. Not since the emptiness had turned me into a ghost who'd forgotten what it meant to care. Until now." The man's eyes darted to my gun, then back to my face. For a heartbeat, I saw his resolve falter, the kind of hesitation only a coward knows when confronted by someone who won't back down. He tried to mask it with a sneer, sucking hard on his cigarette until the ember flared bright, but his hand trembled, and the smoke curled unevenly between his cracked lips. "This ain't your business," he spat. "She's mine. Blood or not, she belongs to me, and I'll raise her how I see fit." The girl had pressed herself against the wall, clutching 2 dirty potatoes to her chest like they were treasure. Her eyes were wide, far too old for a child's, and filled with the kind of weary acceptance no one that young should ever know. She didn't scream, didn't beg me to help. She simply watched, as though she already knew the outcome, no matter which way the night turned. That silence broke me more than any cry could have. I stepped closer, slow and deliberate, the boards beneath my boots groaning under the weight of my decision. My voice came out low, steady, and colder than the steel resting at my side. "Where I come from, men don't burn children and call it discipline." He barked out a laugh, sharp and joyless, but I saw the sweat bead along his temple. "You don't scare me," he said, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. "I've killed men before, stranger. Bigger than you." "Maybe," I answered. "But you won't kill me. And you won't lay another hand on her." For a moment, the only sound was the faint clatter of the saloon piano bleeding into the alley. Then his hand moved, too fast for his state, but I'd been watching for it. The glint of a knife flashed in the lamplight as he lunged, clumsy and desperate. I stepped sideways, years of muscle memory guiding me, and drove my knee into his gut with enough force to rip the air from his lungs. He folded, choking, the knife clattering to the dirt. My boot sent it skittering into the shadows where neither of us could reach it. He gasped, tried to rise, but I crouched low, my voice a growl meant only for his ears. "Stay down," I warned. "If I hear you so much as raise your voice at her again, I'll put you in the ground where you belong." He spat blood into the dirt, glaring at me with hatred that couldn't mask the fear eating away at him. Then he stumbled backward, retreating into the dark, muttering curses he didn't have the strength to carry. Only when the shadows had swallowed him did I turn back to the girl. She hadn't moved. She sat curled against the wall, her knees drawn tight to her chest, potatoes still clutched like lifelines. Her breathing came shallow and quick, and when I crouched to meet her eyes, she flinched, as though bracing for the blow that never came. "Are you hurt?" I asked, my voice gentler than it had been in years. She shook her head, though her thin frame trembled as though every breath cost her strength she didn't have. "What's your name?" I pressed. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, so soft I almost didn't hear it, she whispered, "Lucy." I nodded. "I'm Nathan." The name felt strange on my tongue, as though I hadn't spoken it in years. For so long, I'd been nothing but a shadow passing through towns, nameless to the people I left behind. Saying it to her was different. It mattered. She blinked up at me, and I saw the bruises along her wrists, the hollowness in her cheeks, the dirt caked into her auburn hair. She looked like a wildflower growing through stone, fragile and beautiful only because of the impossible conditions that had failed to kill her. I extended my hand, slow and steady, careful not to spook her. "Come on. Let's get you something to eat." Her eyes darted to the alley where her stepfather had vanished, then back to my hand. I could see the war raging inside her, the instinct to trust warring with a learned certainty that trust meant pain. At last, with a hesitance that made my chest ache, she placed her small hand in mine. It was cold, dirt-stained, and trembling, but it was a choice. And it was the moment my life changed forever. I led her through the saloon, ignoring the way men's eyes followed us, some curious, others wary. The bartender muttered something under his breath, but when I met his gaze, he dropped it, going back to polishing the same glass he'd never get clean. We crossed Main Street to the boarding house, a weathered building run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. She was the sort of woman who didn't ask questions but saw more than most, the kind who had learned that survival meant kindness without expectation. When she opened the door and her eyes fell on Lucy, something in her expression softened, though she said nothing. Instead, she bustled us inside, setting a plate of stew and bread on the table before the girl. Lucy ate with the quiet desperation of someone who had known real hunger. Every spoonful seemed both salvation and shame, as if she couldn't quite believe she was allowed to take it. I sat across from her, watching the way her small frame hunched protectively over the food, and a memory of Catherine hit me like a blow. The way she used to fuss over the orphans that trailed through Dodge, pressing bread into their hands even when we had little enough ourselves. She would have seen Lucy and known instantly. She would have taken her in without hesitation. By the time the plate was empty, Lucy's eyes were heavy with exhaustion, her body sagging against the chair. Mrs. Patterson offered a bed upstairs, and though the girl looked ready to argue, she didn't. Her small body simply couldn't fight any more. When I left her in the room that night, curled beneath a quilt far too big for her, I stood in the doorway longer than I should have. Something stirred in me, something I thought had died with Catherine in that grave outside Dodge City. A purpose, a reason. But I also knew this was only the beginning. Copper Creek wasn't the kind of town that let people walk away clean. Her stepfather would be back. The sheriff wouldn't care. And this girl, Lucy, deserved more than the scraps of mercy a town like this had to offer. For the first time in years, I prayed. Not for myself. For her. And as I lay awake in the boarding house that night, the sound of her coughing drifted down the hall, harsh, ragged, and far too familiar. It was the sound that had haunted me through Catherine's final days. My heart went cold. I knew that sound. Consumption. And just like that, I understood. Saving Lucy wasn't just about one night in an alley. It was about giving her a chance at life, no matter how little time she had left. Morning in Copper Creek didn't bring light the way it did in other places. The sun still rose over the mountains, painting the desert ridges gold, but here in town it only seemed to reveal more of the cracks, peeling paint on weather-beaten buildings, sagging roofs patched with whatever scraps men could scavenge, and the haunted faces of people who moved like shadows through their daily routines. I'd spent enough years drifting to know the difference between a struggling town and a dying one. Copper Creek was the latter. I sat on the boarding house porch, nursing a tin cup of bitter coffee, when Lucy stepped out. She looked smaller in the daylight, fragile as a sapling bent by too many storms. Her hair caught the morning sun, revealing a hint of auburn beneath the dust and tangles, and her thin arms clutched at herself as though trying to hold her body together. She coughed, sharp and wet, the sound clawing at my insides because I had heard it before. Catherine had coughed that way in her final months. Lucy noticed me watching and tried to mask it with a weak smile, as if she was used to pretending nothing was wrong. "Morning," she whispered. I nodded, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. She hesitated before sitting, her legs swinging just above the porch floorboards. For a while we sat in silence, listening to the clatter of wagons on the street, the bray of a mule, the faint sound of a hammer from the blacksmith shop. Life continued in Copper Creek, but it was a tired, joyless kind of life. It was Lucy who spoke first. "You shouldn't have helped me last night." Her words cut deep, not because of ingratitude, but because of the resignation behind them. She wasn't angry, she was afraid. "Why's that?" I asked. "He'll be back." Her voice trembled, but her eyes didn't leave the horizon. "He always comes back. And when he does, it's worse." I didn't answer right away. My fingers traced the rim of my coffee cup, and I thought about all the towns like this I'd passed through, places where cruelty was left unchecked because no one had the stomach to confront it. Men like her stepfather thrived in such places, feeding on fear like wolves among sheep. "He won't touch you again," I said at last. She shook her head, a hollow laugh escaping her lips. "You don't know him. Nobody stops him. Not the sheriff. Not anyone." That caught my attention. The sheriff's job was to protect, but I had seen enough of the frontier to know how often the law bent under the weight of whiskey and gambling debts. "What about your mother?" I asked carefully, though I feared the answer. Lucy's small shoulders stiffened, and for a moment she looked as though she might not speak. Then, in a voice so quiet I had to lean closer, she whispered, "She's gone." "How long?" "6 months." She pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them. "They said she fell down the stairs." But the way her lips twisted on the word said told me everything. The official story was a lie, and the truth was too dark for a child to carry alone. My chest tightened. Catherine's death had been slow, a wasting sickness that robbed her breath until she was only a shadow in my arms. But Lucy's mother, hers had been sudden, brutal, and I didn't need to ask who had pushed her. The girl's stepfather carried the kind of cruelty that didn't stop at beatings. I wanted to rage, to storm back into that alley, drag the man into the street, and end him right there. But years of war had taught me that blind fury was as dangerous as cowardice. Violence was a tool, and like any tool, it had to be wielded with precision. Still, my decision was made. Whatever happened, I would not leave Lucy here. Over the next few days, I stayed in Copper Creek longer than I'd stayed anywhere in years. I kept to the boarding house mostly, helping Mrs. Patterson with odd repairs to earn my keep and watching Lucy as she drifted between chores. She was quiet, always careful, always glancing over her shoulder as if expecting her stepfather's shadow to fall across her. Yet beneath the fear, I caught glimpses of something else. Determination. A spark that hadn't yet been crushed. In town, whispers followed me. Men muttered at the saloon, their eyes sliding away when I met their gaze. Copper Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everything, but no one dared to speak it aloud. The story of Margaret, Lucy's mother, hung over them like smoke. Folks said she had been gentle, kind, the sort of woman who gave away bread even when she had little enough herself. But when her husband lost his job at the copper mine and turned to drink, she had borne the brunt of his rage. Everyone knew it. No one stopped it. Now Lucy was left with him, and the sheriff, Morrison, a heavy-set man with eyes too close together, was no better than useless. I learned soon enough that he owed Lucy's stepfather money, lost in the saloon's back rooms over poker tables. Debt was a leash, and it kept him from ever crossing the man who should have been in jail. The sickness in Copper Creek wasn't just consumption, it was corruption. On the fourth morning, Lucy sat beside me on the porch again. She stared out at the mountains for a long time before speaking. "My mama didn't fall," she said suddenly, her voice trembling but steady enough to make my blood run cold. "He pushed her. I saw it." The cup slipped from my hand, shattering on the porch boards, but I hardly noticed. All I saw was the pain etched into that small face, the truth she had carried alone for half a year. She turned to me then, tears streaking her cheeks, and for the first time in years I felt something burn hot in my chest. Not grief, not despair, but resolve. Cold and unshakable. I placed my hand gently over hers. "You don't have to carry that alone anymore." She didn't answer, but in her silence, I heard the faintest sound of trust beginning to take root. And I knew, as sure as I knew my own name, that Copper Creek would not let us walk away without blood. Copper Creek was a place where days bled into nights without much change, but for me, each sunrise carried a mounting weight. I couldn't shake Lucy's words. He pushed her. I saw it. The truth of Margaret's death hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear, choking everything it touched. Every time I looked at Lucy, I saw not just the bruises on her arms or the hollowness in her cheeks, but the unbearable burden she carried. A child forced to live in silence, knowing the man who killed her mother still breathed free. I told myself I was only staying long enough to see her safe, to put distance between her and that monster. But days turned into a week, and still I hadn't left. Each night, I lay awake in the boarding house, listening to her cough echo down the hallway, harsh and ragged, tearing at my memories until Catherine's face blurred with Lucy's. The sound was a reminder that time was running thin, not just for escape, but for her life. The first step was simple: figure out who in Copper Creek could be trusted. That didn't take long. The answer was no one. Sheriff Morrison barely looked me in the eye when I crossed paths with him, and when he did, it was with a sneer that reminded me whose pocket he was in. The saloon keeper, Hank Dwyer, was worse, always watching from behind the bar with a fox's grin, his hands deep in every crooked deal in town. Even the townsfolk who weren't corrupt were cowed, their silence bought by fear or habit. Copper Creek was a closed fist. Breaking it open meant blood. One evening, I found Lucy on the porch again, her small frame wrapped in a blanket Mrs. Patterson had loaned her. The sky burned with the dying sun, streaks of red and gold across the desert horizon. She held the blanket tight around her shoulders, her lips pale, her breath shallow. "You ever been outside this town?" I asked her. She shook her head. "Mama talked about going west. Said there was land near the rivers. She wanted to grow things." Her voice caught on the word wanted. "You could still go," I told her. Her eyes lifted to mine, skeptical. "With him around? I'd never get far." I leaned forward, lowering my voice. "What if I helped you?" For the first time since I'd met her, I saw the spark of something in Lucy's eyes. Hope. Fragile, dangerous hope. She bit her lip, the way children do when they're afraid to believe in something too good. "Why would you do that for me?" she whispered. I hesitated. The easy answer was because it was the right thing. But the truth was heavier, rooted in the grave outside Dodge where Catherine lay. Saving Lucy wasn't just for her. It was for me, too. For the man I used to be. The man Catherine believed I still could be. "Because you deserve better," I said simply. She turned away, blinking fast, as if the idea of being worthy of kindness was more than she could stand. That night, I made my plan. At dawn in 2 days' time, we'd leave Copper Creek. I knew a trail that cut through the mountains, bypassing the main road. Dangerous, yes, but less watched. If we were lucky, we could reach Santa Fe in a week, maybe find a doctor willing to see her. The cost would be steep, but I still carried coins hidden in the lining of my saddlebag, blood money from jobs I'd taken after the war, money I'd sworn I'd never spend. Catherine would have wanted it used for life, not whiskey or bullets. But plans have a way of unraveling in places like Copper Creek. The following day, her stepfather returned. I spotted him first, swaggering down Main Street with 2 men trailing behind him, rough types with the look of drifters too desperate to ask questions. His face was still bruised from our last encounter, a dark purple bloom across his jaw, but the fire in his eyes told me he hadn't forgotten. I moved fast, steering Lucy back into the boarding house before he caught sight of her. Mrs. Patterson, bless her, pressed a handkerchief to Lucy's lips as another coughing fit racked her, and I caught the faint smear of blood on the fabric. My chest clenched. The sickness was digging deeper. "Keep her inside," I told Mrs. Patterson. "No matter who knocks." Then I stepped back onto the street, where the man was already looking for me. "Well, well," he drawled, his grin stretching cruel over broken teeth. "Thought you'd slipped away, stranger. Turns out you've been playin' house with what's mine." The street had quieted, folks retreating to doorways and windows to watch without being seen. Copper Creek was like that, always eager for blood, too afraid to intervene. "She's not yours," I said flatly. His face twisted, rage boiling to the surface. "You think you can take my girl? Walk into my town and steal from me? She's not a thing to be stolen. She's a child." That word, child, seemed to cut deeper than anything else. His face darkened, and he spat on the ground, signaling to the 2 men at his side. They moved forward, hands resting on pistols, eyes cold. It should have turned bloody right there. My hand hovered near my Colt, my pulse steady, waiting for the inevitable. But before steel cleared leather, Sheriff Morrison lumbered into view. "Enough!" the sheriff barked, though the sweat shining on his forehead betrayed how little control he truly had. He cast a glance at me, then at the stepfather, then back again, his lips twitching like a man caught between 2 fires. "Stranger," he said finally, "best you move along. Copper Creek don't need outsiders stirring up trouble." "And what about her?" I asked, my voice low, dangerous. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver. "Ain't your concern. That's family business." The words sealed it. Copper Creek wasn't going to save Lucy. If she was to be saved, it would have to be by me, and me alone. As I walked back to the boarding house, the stepfather's laughter followed me down the street, harsh and triumphant. He thought he'd won, that the law itself bent to his will. But all it did was carve my resolve deeper into stone. That night, as Lucy slept fitfully, her cough rattling through the thin walls, I packed my saddlebag. 2 days was too long. We would leave at dawn. And if Copper Creek tried to stop us, then Copper Creek would learn what kind of man it had chosen to make its enemy. The desert before dawn was a place of silence, a breath held between night and day. The sky stretched black above, pricked with dying stars, and the chill in the air bit through my coat. I'd spent half the night sitting by the window, pistol across my lap, listening to Lucy's uneven breaths in the room next door. Every cough seemed sharper than the last, every pause in her breathing too long. She was running out of time. I'd meant to wait, to gather more supplies, to chart a safer path. But Copper Creek had closed its fist around us. If we stayed, she would either die of sickness or under her stepfather's hand. So I chose the only chance we had, flight. Mrs. Patterson had agreed to help, her face set with the grim determination of a woman who'd buried too many friends in this cursed town. At first light, she'd slipped Lucy out the back of the boarding house, where I'd be waiting with the horses. She pressed a small parcel into my hand, bread, jerky, a flask of water. "It ain't much," she whispered, "but it's more than she'll get if you don't take her." The look in her eyes told me she knew what this meant. Copper Creek didn't forgive defiance. The eastern horizon glowed faintly when Lucy emerged, wrapped in her mother's old shawl. She looked too small in the saddle, but she held the reins with a quiet determination that broke my heart. A child who had no business knowing such resolve. "You ready?" I asked. She nodded, though her lips were pale, her breath shallow. We rode fast through the sleeping town, hooves muffled by sand. For a moment, I let myself believe we might slip away unseen. The trail ahead wound into the foothills, and once we reached the ridges, the desert would hide us. But Copper Creek was not a place that let go easy. Halfway down Main Street, a voice rang out. "Stop right there." Sheriff Morrison stood in front of the jailhouse, lantern held high. Behind him, figures stirred, men with rifles, their outlines sharp against the dim glow of the saloon lamps. The stepfather was among them, his grin a slash of cruelty across his face. Lucy stiffened in the saddle beside me, her hands tightening on the reins. "Stranger," the sheriff barked, "you ain't talking her anywhere. Hand her over." My hand hovered near my Colt, but I didn't draw. Not yet. The odds were against us. 5, maybe 6 men, all armed. Shooting now would mean dying in the street, and Lucy couldn't outrun bullets. "Sheriff," I said, my voice steady, "you know what kind of man he is. You know what he did." Morrison's jaw tightened, his eyes flicking to the stepfather before darting away. Debt had made a coward of him, and cowardice had rotted the town. "Don't matter," he muttered. "She's his blood. You got no right. She's a child." My words cracked the silence. "And he's a murderer." The stepfather stepped forward then, spreading his arms wide like he was welcoming the dawn. "Preacher man," he sneered, "you think you're her savior? You think you can ride in here and undo what's mine? She belongs to me. Always has." Lucy's voice cut through the air, small but sharp as a blade. "I don't belong to you." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Even the sheriff seemed startled. But then the stepfather's smile twisted into something darker, and his hand dropped toward his gun. That was enough. My Colt cleared leather in a heartbeat, the shot echoing down the street like thunder. The bullet struck the dirt at his feet. Not a kill, not yet, but a warning. The men flinched, rifles wavering. "We're leavin'," I said, my voice low, the weight of steel steady in my hand. "Anyone tries to stop us, they'll answer for it." For a heartbeat, I thought it might work. Fear flickered in their eyes, the kind that spreads quick when a man shows he's willing to stand alone against a crowd. But the stepfather only laughed, the sound raw and jagged. "Then we'll hunt you," he spat. "Ride you down like the dog you are." His words struck true, because I knew he meant them. We might escape tonight, but Copper Creek wouldn't stop. Not while he breathed. I backed the horse slowly, keeping my gun steady, Lucy's mount pressed close to mine. Then, with a sharp kick, we bolted, hooves striking sparks from the hard-packed earth. Shots rang out behind us, wild and desperate, but none found their mark. The desert opened before us, wide and merciless. Wind tore at my coat, grit stung my eyes, but I didn't look back. Lucy clung to the saddle, her breath rasping, every cough a knife to my chest. We rode until the town lights were no more than a memory, swallowed by the mountains. Only then did I slow, guiding her horse into the shelter of a canyon wall. She slumped in the saddle, pale as moonlight, the shawl slipping from her shoulders. I caught her before she fell. Her forehead burned under my hand, fever blazing high. Blood flecked her lips when she coughed. "I can't keep up," she whispered. "You will," I said, though the lie burned in my throat. "You're strong, Lucy. Stronger than anyone I've ever met." Her eyes fluttered, heavy with exhaustion, but she clung to my hand with surprising strength. For the first time, she looked at me not with fear or doubt, but with trust. That trust was a weight heavier than any gun I'd ever carried. As the night deepened around us, I knew the truth. Running would not be enough. Copper Creek wouldn't stop. The stepfather wouldn't stop. If Lucy was ever to be free, the fight couldn't end on the road. It had to end in Copper Creek. The desert swallowed sound, leaving only the whisper of the wind across stone. By dawn, we had ridden far enough that Copper Creek was no more than a ghost on the horizon. The mountains loomed before us, jagged teeth against the pale sky, and the horses trembled with exhaustion. I reined us into a dry ravine, hidden from sight, and helped Lucy down from the saddle. She was light as a shadow, her legs too weak to hold her. I laid her against the canyon wall, wrapping the shawl tight around her trembling frame. Her eyes fluttered open, pale blue and clouded with fever. Did we make it?" she whispered. "For now," I said, though the words tasted bitter. "We're safe here." But even as I spoke, I knew it wasn't true. Safe was a lie I wanted to believe. The sickness inside her didn't care about distance or darkness. And the men in Copper Creek, led by that monster who called himself a stepfather, would hunt us until the desert itself turned to bone. Lucy coughed, harsh and ragged, flecks of red staining the cloth I pressed to her lips. The sound tore me open, dragging me back through the years to another face, another frail body in my arms. Catherine, pale and weak in her final days, whispering that I was more than the violence the war had carved into me, that I could still be the man she saw, if only I chose it. But I hadn't chosen it. Not then. I drowned her words in whiskey and gun smoke, let the darkness take me. Now Lucy's hand clutched at mine, small and burning with fever, and I felt Catherine's ghost between us. If I failed here, I'd be burying 2 women instead of 1. The thought hollowed me. For 2 days, we stayed hidden. I fed Lucy what little food we had, rationing every crumb. I searched the ravine for water, finding a trickle in the stone that kept us alive. At night, I wrapped her in my coat, listening to her cough until exhaustion stole her voice. Every morning, I watched her grow weaker, and the truth pressed harder. The road west was too long. She wouldn't survive it. And even if she did, what kind of life would it be? Always looking over her shoulder, waiting for the day Copper Creek's shadows caught up to her? No. Running wasn't enough. Hiding wasn't enough. If she was ever to be free, Copper Creek had to be broken. The decision settled on me like a stone. Heavy. Inevitable. That night, as the stars burned cold above, I sat by the dying fire and pulled my gun from its holster. The steel glimmered in the light, familiar and unforgiving. My Colt had been my closest companion through war, through blood and exile. I'd sworn I would never use it again except to protect, never to wage war. But Copper Creek had declared war the moment its sheriff turned his eyes away and let a child rot under a murderer's hand. I cleaned the gun slowly, methodically, each movement steady as prayer. My fingers remembered the motions too well, oiling the chamber, checking the barrel, counting cartridges by feel. The sound of the cylinder clicking back into place echoed through the canyon, sharp and final. Lucy stirred in her sleep, murmuring something I couldn't catch. I paused, watching her face. The fever had carved hollows under her eyes, but there was still a stubbornness there, a will that refused to break. She didn't know yet that we weren't heading west. She didn't know that we'd be riding straight back into the fire. When I finally lay down beside her, the choice burned in me like iron. I would ride back into Copper Creek. I would drag its rot into the open. I would end the man who had stolen her childhood and murdered her mother. And if the whole town rose against me, then let it. I'd already died once in the war. At dawn, I saddled the horses again. Lucy woke weakly, coughing into her shawl, and looked at me with hollow eyes. "Are we still going west?" she asked. I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her damp forehead. "Not yet," I said softly. "First, we've got something to finish." Fear flickered across her face, but she didn't argue. She only nodded, as if some part of her had always known this moment was coming. We rode slowly, conserving the horses, the desert stretching wide around us. With every mile back toward Copper Creek, my resolve hardened. I thought of the sheriff, the saloon keeper, the men who laughed while a girl wasted away under a tyrant's hand. They'd built their lives on silence and fear. I was coming to tear it apart. By dusk, the faint glow of the town appeared in the distance. Lanterns flickered in the saloon, voices carried on the wind, and smoke curled into the sky. It looked small from where we stood, fragile even, but I knew better. Copper Creek was a nest of vipers, and I was about to step into it barefoot. Lucy's horse trembled beneath her, sensing her weakness. She swayed in the saddle, eyes heavy with fever. I rode close, steadying her, my jaw set like stone. "We'll end this," I whispered to myself. The words meant as much for Catherine's ghost as for Lucy's ears. One way or another. As the night closed in, I led us toward Copper Creek, the town where death waited. Not as a shadow chasing me this time, but as a reckoning I carried with my own hands. Copper Creek looked different when you rode toward it with death in your pocket. The lanterns on Main Street flickered weakly, halos of yellow swallowed by the black desert night. The saloon's piano played a stumbling tune that drifted across the still air, but even that sound felt hollow, as though the town itself knew judgment was riding in. Lucy leaned forward in her saddle, her body trembling. Every mile back had taken more from her. By the time we reached the outskirts, her skin burned hot as fire and her lips had cracked to blood. She tried to hide her pain, biting it back with the same quiet strength that had carried her this far, but I saw it. Every shudder, every sharp breath. She was hanging by a thread. I pulled us into the shadows behind the abandoned livery barn, the same place I'd first tied my horse when I rode into this cursed town weeks ago. Full circle. My colt weighed heavy at my side, but heavier still was the knowledge that I couldn't just draw and shoot my way through this. Copper Creek was rotten to the bone, but rot spreads through silence. If I was to cut it out, I'd need more than bullets. I'd need the town itself to see the truth. Lucy slumped against me when I lifted her from the saddle, her body burning in my arms. She whispered something. I leaned close to catch it. Don't let him take me back." Her voice was a rasp of fear, but underneath it lay something sharper. Trust. The same trust Catherine had once given me. Trust one had failed then, but would not fail now. "I won't," I said, and I meant it with everything left in me. I carried her into the boarding house through the back door. Mrs. Patterson nearly dropped her lantern when she saw us. "Lord above," she breathed, pressing a hand to her mouth. "You fool man, you brought her back?" I laid Lucy on the cot in the back room, covering her with blankets. "She won't survive the road west," I said. "The fight's here." Mrs. Patterson's eyes flicked to the window, to the glow of the street beyond. Fear carved lines deeper into her face. "You don't know what you've done. He'll have the sheriff, the saloon, half the town in his pocket. Then I'll take the other half." I didn't say it like a boast. Just a fact. She stared at me for a long moment, then her shoulders sagged. "God help us all," she whispered. I spent the next day walking Copper Creek in the daylight, as though I hadn't fled under gunfire only nights before. Eyes followed me from windows, whispers chased my steps. The saloon doors swung open when I passed, and the men inside spat curses low enough they thought I wouldn't hear. The sheriff avoided me altogether, though I saw him drinking heavier than usual, his hands shaking as he poured. But not everyone looked away. Old miner Jacob, who'd lost 2 sons to the stepfather's cruelty, met my gaze and nodded once. The blacksmith's wife, bruises still fresh on her cheek, pressed a loaf of bread into my hands and murmured, "Do it." Even the children, thin, hollow-eyed, watched me with something I hadn't seen before. Not hope, not yet, but maybe the shadow of it. By evening, word had spread. The preacher was back, and he meant to finish it. Lucy's fever worsened. She drifted in and out of consciousness, whispering things that made little sense. Once she reached for my hand and called me Pa. It split me open, left me choking on words I couldn't say. I sat beside her through the night, listening to her shallow breaths, and each one sharpened the blade in me. When dawn came, I strapped on my gun belt. Mrs. Patterson stopped me at the door. "He'll kill you," she said simply. "Maybe," I answered. "But if I don't try, he'll kill her, and this town will keep rotting in his shadow." I stepped out into the street. The air was sharp with morning cold. Across the way, the saloon doors swung open, and there he stood, Lucy's stepfather. Hat low, grin wide, eyes burning with hate. "Well, look here," he drawled, voice carrying down the street. "The preacher crawls back to die where he belongs." Men filed out behind him. Sheriff Morrison, 2 hired guns, and a half-dozen others too drunk or too bought to know better. They lined up like a wall of iron, rifles glinting. But then something unexpected happened. The blacksmith stepped into the street. Old Jacob, leaning on his cane, followed. Mrs. Patterson, lantern still burning in her hand. One by one, faces appeared in the doorways and alleys, silent but present. The town was watching, caught between fear and something new. The stepfather sneered. "Think they'll save you? These cowards? They've bent knee to me for years." I met his gaze, my hand resting on the butt of my Colt. "They don't have to save me. They just have to see you." The tension cracked the air like lightning. Every man knew what was coming. There would be no peace, no words left that could turn this tide. Only the reckoning we'd been riding toward since the first night Lucy spoke her truth. My heart beat steady, not from courage but from clarity. This wasn't about me anymore. It hadn't been since I heard a dying woman's promise in Lucy's cough. The time for running was over. The time for judgment had come. The silence broke with the metallic click of a revolver's hammer. I stood in the middle of Main Street, dust curling around my boots, facing the man who had poisoned this town for years. Behind him, his dogs barked, sheriff, hired guns, drunks with rifles trembling in their hands. Behind me, Copper Creek watched. Doorways crowded with faces, windows cracked open just enough to see history tilt on its axis. The stepfather's grin was wide, teeth yellow in the lantern light. "Go on then, preacher. Draw. Let's end your little sermon." My fingers hovered near the Colt, but I didn't move. Instead, I raised my voice so the whole town could hear. "You all know what he is," I said, the words carrying down the street. "You've seen it. The bruises. The graves. How many children gone before their time? How many mothers buried in silence?" Murmurs stirred in the crowd, faint but rising. The stepfather's eyes narrowed. "You think these sheep care?" he spat. "They've lived under me this long. They'll live under me when you're rotting in the ground." He lifted his gun. The world slowed. The first shot cracked like thunder. It wasn't mine. Old Jacob, half blind and shaking, had fired from the edge of the crowd. His bullet went wide, shattering a saloon window, but it was enough. Enough to shatter the spell of silence that had bound Copper Creek for years. Chaos erupted. Gunfire roared across Main Street. The stepfather's men fired wild into the crowd, and townsfolk scattered, screaming. Dust filled the air as bullets split wood and glass. I dropped, rolled, and fired twice. 2 hired guns fell, clutching their chests. The Colt felt like an extension of my hand, each shot clean, purposeful. The sheriff barked orders, but his voice broke under panic. He ducked behind a water trough, firing blindly. The stepfather strode through the chaos, calm as a storm, his revolver spitting fire. I moved through the street like it was war again, the smoke, the screams, the metallic tang of blood. My past had followed me here, but this time it had a purpose. I wasn't killing for orders or survival. I was carving out space for a child to live. Behind me, townsfolk began to fight back. The blacksmith swung his hammer against a drunk's rifle, sending the man sprawling. Mrs. Patterson lit her lantern oil and hurled it through the sheriff's office window. The flames roared to life, casting the whole street in hellfire glow. The rebellion had begun. But in the chaos, I lost sight of him, Lucy's stepfather. My eyes scanned through smoke and fire, heart pounding. Then I saw him, cutting through the panicked crowd, heading toward the boarding house. Toward Lucy. A cold knife of terror sliced through me. I tore after him, dodging bullets and flames. A man lunged from the side alley, rifle raised. I smashed the butt of my Colt into his jaw and kept running. The noise behind me faded. Only one thing mattered, reaching Lucy before he did. I burst into the boarding house, gun raised. The stepfather stood at the foot of the cot. Lucy lay pale and trembling, her fever-racked eyes fluttering open as his shadow fell over her. His grin twisted when he saw me. "You think she'll ever be yours, preacher?" he sneered. "She's mine. Always has been. Always will be." I fired. The bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him back. He roared, charging at me with a knife drawn. We crashed into the wall, splintering wood. His breath stank of whiskey and rot as he drove the blade toward my throat. I caught his wrist, muscles straining, every ounce of war-hardened rage flooding me. "Not any more," I growled. I slammed his hand against the wall until the knife clattered to the floor. He swung wild, fists heavy, catching my jaw and sending stars across my vision. I staggered, blood filling my mouth. He lunged again. This time I didn't hesitate. I raised the Colt and pulled the trigger. The shot tore through his side. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, hate burning even as his lifeblood spilled across the boarding house floor. But he wasn't dead. Not yet. "You'll never kill me enough," he rasped, blood on his teeth. "This town is mine. Even if I die, it'll rot in my name." Lucy stirred weakly, whispering, "Nathan." Her voice was so faint it nearly broke me. I aimed the Colt again, finger tightening. And then I stopped. Not out of mercy, but because killing him here, quietly, wasn't enough. The town needed to see. They needed to watch their monster fall. So I struck him hard across the temple with the guns, but, knocking him unconscious. His body hit the floor heavy as stone. I dragged him by the collar out the door, across the dirt, and into the firelit street. The townsfolk froze as they saw their tyrant bleeding, broken, in the preacher's grip. I dropped him in the dust, raised my Colt high, and shouted over the crackle of flames. "This ends tonight." The crowd surged, half in fury, half in fear. The sheriff leveled his rifle at me, rage twisting his face. Behind him, the saloon owner bellowed orders, calling for blood. The battle wasn't over. No, it was only beginning. But for the first time, Copper Creek had seen their devil fall. And there was no going back. Main Street was fire and thunder. The sheriff's rifle cracked through the night, the shot splintering the post inches from my head. I dove behind the trough, dragging the unconscious stepfather into the dust like a trophy. Bullets screamed past, glass shattered, and the once quiet town of Copper Creek became a battlefield. The townsfolk were split down the middle, half-raised weapons in desperate rebellion, swinging axes, knives, and stolen rifles. The other half clung to the sheriff, too frightened or too drunk to see past his orders. The flames from Mrs. Patterson's lantern lit the saloon like a bonfire, throwing long shadows that danced across the street as smoke choked the air. I could feel Lucy's eyes on me, even from inside the boarding house. She was too weak to move, but I knew she could hear the chaos, knew she would blame herself for the war raging outside her window. That thought pressed into me like a blade. I couldn't let this fall apart. Not now, not when we were this close to breaking the chain. I rose, firing twice. One of the sheriff's men fell, his rifle clattering into the dirt. Another stumbled back, arm shredded by lead. My Colt roared like judgment, and each shot carried the weight of years of silence cracking open. The sheriff bellowed, "Take him down. He ain't no savior. He's a killer." His words rang false. For the first time, I could see doubt flickering in the men's eyes, see townsfolk hesitating in the firelight. And then Jacob, the old miner, limped forward through the smoke, his cracked voice carrying like a bell. "No more," he shouted. "No more graves dug for this man's coin. No more children buried because we feared him. I lost my boys to his mine, and I'll be damned before I watch another die for him." His cane slammed into the dust. The crowd roared, not all, not enough, but more than before. The tide was shifting, inch by inch, and the sheriff knew it. His eyes burned as he swung his rifle toward Jacob. I fired first. The bullet tore into the sheriff's shoulder, spinning him back. He dropped to one knee, howling, his rifle clattering away. The crowd gasped, some crying out, others cheering. For a moment the sheriff's mask cracked, and all they saw was a man, mortal, bleeding, no different than the rest. But he wasn't done. The saloon owner, Harris, a rat of a man who'd grown fat off every coin the stepfather bled from this town, grabbed a shotgun from behind the bar and stormed into the street. His voice was shrill with rage. "Kill him! Kill the preacher before he ruins us all!" He fired wild into the crowd, and screams split the air. A woman fell, clutching her chest. The fragile unity wavered. People scattered, panic clawing at their throats. I saw it then, how fragile this was, how quickly fear could smother the spark of rebellion. If Harris and the sheriff held the line, the town would collapse back into silence. Lucy's suffering, Jacob's courage, all of it would die here in the smoke. I couldn't let that happen. I dragged the stepfather's limp body into the center of the street, dropping him in the dust for all to see. Then I raised my voice, hoarse but cutting through the chaos. "This is the man you feared," I shouted. This is what's ruled you, bleeding in the dirt, no power left but lies. I kicked him onto his back, his face pale under the blood. He stirred faintly, but no words came. Just the image of a broken tyrant. The crowd stilled. For the first time they looked, not at me, not at the sheriff, but at him. The man they'd feared, undone and weak. Harris shrieked, raising his shotgun again. Don't listen to him. He's poison. He'll bring ruin on every one of us. I turned, leveled my Colt, and fired. The shot punched through Harris's chest. He staggered back, eyes wide, and collapsed into the dust. His shotgun fell silent. The street hushed. Flames crackled. Smoke drifted. And in the silence, the weight of truth pressed down on Copper Creek. The sheriff clutched his bleeding shoulder, eyes wide with desperation. "You'll burn this town down," he rasped, voice trembling. "You'll kill us all in the name of salvation." I stepped forward, Colt still raised. "No," I said. "I'll kill what's killing you. The rest is up to you." Behind me, Jacob lifted his cane, voice breaking but strong. "Stand with him, or kneel with the devil. Tonight decides who we are." The choice was laid bare. The crowd shifted, whispers turning to shouts, shouts turning to defiance. More men dropped their rifles. Women pulled their children close but stayed in the street, no longer hiding. The tide turned like a river breaking its banks. The sheriff stumbled back, cornered, blood soaking his coat. His eyes darted to the stepfather's body, then to me. And I saw it, the fear. The same fear he'd sown in others now hollowing him out. But before I could move, a sound cut through the fire and smoke. Lucy's voice. Weak, trembling, but carrying. "Don't let him live." The crowd turned toward the boarding house window. Lucy stood there, pale and shaking, holding herself upright against the frame. Her fever-glazed eyes burned with a fire I'd never seen before. And the town listened. They saw not just me, not just a preacher with a gun, but a child who had suffered, who demanded an end to the nightmare. The sheriff fell to his knees, his face crumbling. "Please, don't," he whispered, begging. The crowd roared, voices rising in one terrible, righteous cry. And I knew Copper Creek had chosen. The sheriff's fate, and the stepfather's, would be sealed before dawn. But judgment, true judgment, still lay ahead. The night bled into chaos. The sheriff, wounded but unbroken, had fled into the burning saloon with the last of his men. From inside, gunfire rattled, and smoke billowed like the breath of hell itself. The townsfolk hesitated, caught between fear and fury. I knew what was happening. He was gathering what remained, digging in for one last stand. A cornered man is the most dangerous kind, and this sheriff had ruled through fear too long to die quiet. I turned to the crowd, my voice raw. "Copper Creek will never be free if you stop now. If you turn back, the fire dies with us, and the chains return." Jacob raised his cane, nodding, and others followed, their faces hardening. One by one, hammers clicked, rifles loaded. The town was ready. We stormed the saloon. The doors blew open under the blacksmith's boot, and we surged into smoke and gunfire. Bottles shattered, men screamed, and the piano toppled with a discordant crash. I moved like I had in war, low, fast, precise. My Colt thundered, and 2 of the sheriff's men dropped. But the sheriff himself fought like a devil, one arm bound in blood, the other clutching a pistol that spat fire through the haze. He shouted curses, calling us traitors, calling me the devil's hand. Every word cracked like a whip, desperate to claw back control. The fight turned savage. Men grappled in the smoke, knives flashing, fists breaking teeth. The smell of whiskey and blood choked the air. A lantern burst, and flames crawled up the saloon walls, devouring wood and glass alike. Through the haze I saw him, the sheriff, reloading behind the bar, eyes wild. I charged. We collided, his shoulder slamming into my ribs. We crashed through the back table, splinters tearing into flesh. His fist hammered my jaw, stars exploding in my vision. I rolled, his blade scraping sparks off the floorboards where my throat had been. My Colt was gone, lost in the smoke. It was down to us. We fought like beasts, clawing, striking, bleeding. His strength was raw, desperate, but mine was honed, fueled by something deeper, Lucy's frail voice still ringing in my skull. Don't let him live. The sheriff drove me against the wall, knife at my chest. Spit flew from his mouth as he hissed, "You'll burn with this town, preacher." I caught his wrist, shoved hard, and with a guttural roar drove the blade back into his side. His eyes went wide, breath rattling. For the first time, fear swallowed his rage. He staggered, blood blooming dark across his vest. "Copper Creek is mine," he gasped. I pulled the knife free and let him fall. Silence spread, broken only by fire crackling as the saloon walls groaned under the weight of flames. His men saw their master fall, and their guns clattered to the floor. Some ran. Others simply sank to their knees, beaten before the crowd. The sheriff was gone. The chain was broken. But the victory was ash in my mouth. Because outside I heard it, Lucy's scream, faint, desperate. I stumbled through the smoke, out into the street. She had collapsed, Jacob and two women struggling to hold her. Her skin was pale as bone, sweat soaking her hair. Her lips moved, whispering my name. I fell to my knees beside her, hands trembling. I'd seen men die 100 ways in war, but nothing hollowed me like this. Jacob's eyes met mine. "She's fading," he said, voice cracking. "If the doc don't find a way, we'll lose her before dawn." And just like that, the truth carved itself into me. The town's freedom had been bought in blood, but Lucy's life, the reason I had fought at all, was slipping away. Copper Creek was free. But freedom meant nothing if she didn't live to see it. And the final choice still lay ahead. The first light of dawn touched the desert mountains, pale and unforgiving, as I held Lucy in my arms. Her breathing was shallow, each rasp a stab through my chest. The street was littered with the remnants of the night's rebellion. Scorched wood, broken glass, and the bodies of those who had fought for tyranny or survival. Copper Creek was ours now, but victory had teeth. I carried her into the boarding house, ignoring the burned and smouldering saloon across the way. Mrs. Patterson had been awake all night, wringing her hands, fear etched into every line of her face. Jacob and a few others hovered anxiously. "She's burning up," Mrs. Patterson whispered, eyes wide. "We need the doctor." I shook my head. No one in town can help her now. Not with the sheriff gone, not with the mess we've made. We need to get her to the coast. There's a place with clean air, doctors who won't turn her away. Lucy murmured something, barely audible. I leaned close. "We're leaving," I said softly. "I'll take care of you. You'll be safe." Her hand weakly touched my chest. "Nathan," she rasped. The single word, fragile and full of trust, was all the armor I had left. We prepared as quickly as her strength would allow. Blankets, food, water, and a few meager supplies, enough for the journey west. I carried her out to the horses, the streets of Copper Creek eerily quiet in the aftermath. The townsfolk watched from doorways and windows, their faces pale but unafraid now. They had seen the tyrant fall, and a spark of hope lingered in their eyes. I placed Lucy gently on my horse, making sure she was as comfortable as possible. The stepfather's body and the remnants of the sheriff's men were reminders of the cost of freedom. I swung into the saddle beside her, feeling the weight of everything we had endured. The first miles of the journey were slow. Lucy's fever had worsened. She shivered against the blankets, her small hands clutching mine. The desert sun rose higher, baking the earth and highlighting the dust that clung to her hair and face. My heart ached with every shallow breath she took. As we rode, I thought of Catherine, of the life I had lost, and of the years of aimless wandering. None of that mattered anymore. Every step, every mile, every heartbeat was dedicated to keeping this fragile life alive. The frontier had hardened me, but Lucy's suffering softened the edges of my rage and taught me a new kind of strength. By mid-afternoon, we found a small settlement near the coast. The air was thick with salt and breeze, the kind that could carry away pain and despair, if only for a moment. I led Lucy to a small, whitewashed house where a doctor awaited, one known for kindness and skill, not profit. The doctor took one look at her and immediately set to work. I watched helplessly as she was tended to, her fever slowly brought down, her fragile body given a chance to heal. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope that she might survive. As night fell, I sat outside the house, watching the waves crash against the rocks. Lucy slept inside, warm and safe for the first time in years. I lit a small fire, thinking of Copper Creek, the town that had been a battlefield, and the child who had given my life purpose again. The frontier was still harsh, still cruel, but in that moment there was a kind of peace. Redemption was not about erasing the past. It was about choosing to fight for someone else, to protect what was fragile and sacred, and to carve out a space where life could flourish even after the darkness. Lucy would live. Copper Creek had changed. And I, a man who had wandered aimlessly for years, had finally found a reason to stay. The stars reflected in the waves. I knew the journey ahead would be hard, but for the first time, I believed in a future worth fighting for. And I would fight for it, every mile, every breath, every heartbeat, for her. The wind carried a quiet promise through the night, survival, hope, and the hard-won peace of the frontier. For Lucy, for Copper Creek, and for myself, the nightmare had ended. If you were in the drifter's boots, facing the darkness of Copper Creek and fighting to protect the innocent, would you have made the same choices? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video. Stay a little longer and explore the other stories waiting for you on screen. You never know which tale will pull you back into the Wild West.